un escritor finlandés de ciencia ficción, cuya obra más conocida quizás sea la serie de Jean Le Flambeur. En España está publicada la primera entrega como el ladrón cuántico. Hi there, we're gonna interview Hannu Rajaniemi, a Finnish writer who has published the Jean Le Flambeur series, and we're gonna talk with him. Hi, Hannu.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Leticia. Really great to be here.
When did you know you wanted to become a writer? Can you explain us Ian and Banks' influence in your books?
So it's just to start with the first question. So I think I actually kind of started thinking about being a writer relatively late. So when I was growing up in Finland, in Ylivieska, in this small town sort of north of the middle of Finland, roughly, I read a lot, and I was quite heavily involved in both tabletop and live action role-playing games. So I had sort of an interest in storytelling and fiction. But and I sort of ran tabletop games, so there was a bit of practice in terms of creating characters and world building. But I didn't so much want to be a writer. I wanted to be a scientist, and that's very much the path I then actually followed. So I studied mathematics and theoretical physics in Finland, and then also in Cambridge University, and did my PhD in Edinburgh. And it was only really in Edinburgh doing my PhD that I sort of kind of got disconnected from that role-playing game community in Finland, and I was looking for something to replace it, and I ended up stumbling across this writers group, also performing spoken word, called White Writers Block, that already sort of included some successful authors like Charlie Stross, and that's I ended up joining the group. That really sort of struck me as something that I wanted to do, and it sort of developed gradually from there. So that group very much sort of encouraged all the members to try to get their work published, and the standard was quite high, and kind of stumbled along and made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, but got some really good criticism from that group. So yeah, I mean, and then at some point it felt like it was worth sort of trying to turn it into something more substantial. But in terms of actually still, I actually don't entirely still feel that I'm a writer. Like I sort of, I mean, I'm a person who writes, obviously, but it's sort of not all I do. So, but certainly one big part of my life. But there's sort of the word writer always just seems so lofty and distant that it's sort of in Finnish there's actually a nice distinction between sort of an author and a writer, and I kind of very much prefer the word sort of the Finnish word of the person who just writes, not necessarily the kind of status carrying word of author. Anyway, so that story does tie in with Ian and Banks a little bit. So I had actually read quite a lot of both Ian Banks and Ian and Banks in Finland, and so both the culture novels and his sort of, if you can call his sort of Ian Banks' works mainstream, and liked them very much. And it's funny, actually, one very strong experience I had was one of the first Ian Banks novels I read was the Crow Road manuscript, which takes place in Scotland. And I read it when I was maybe 19, studying in Finland, and then to me it felt like he was describing some sort of fantasy world, because it has some very vivid descriptions of nature in Scotland. And then I read the book again, maybe 10 years later, when I was living in Scotland, and suddenly it sort of it was a completely different book, actually. So I think there were certainly a lot of qualities in his work, both mainstream and science fiction, that I very much admired, like his incredible sort of prose skill and depth of character, and the sort of wild play of ideas that you have in the culture novels, and I think those were certainly all things that I aspired to. And then of course Ian had very strong connections with the writers group I was in. So a lot of the other members, like Charlie and Andrew Wilson and Ken MacLeod sort of knew him very well personally, and actually my agent John Jarrell was also very close friends with Ian. So it was kind of in this kind of peripheral sphere of his influence, even though I never sort of got to know him that well personally. But so I would say there are those two levels of influence, that sort of initial experience of reading his books in Finland, then reading them in Scotland, and then also having this kind of second-hand personal connection. So yeah.
It's very interesting that what you say about the influence of banks in almost every science fiction writer that is writing in England or in Scotland or Great Britain, don't you think?
Yeah, I think he's certainly kind of at the core of this thing that happened in British science fiction, maybe sort of from the late 90s or early 90s onwards. This sort of movement that people sometimes refer to as the new space opera. And you can certainly associate Ken MacLeod and Charlie Stross and Alistair Reynolds and maybe Ian MacDonald and others with that. And that was kind of maybe part of some sort of renaissance in science fiction in the UK, and absolutely Ian Banks had very, very much to do with that, as a kind of maybe the most successful overall out of that cohort, but also sort of a paragon for the others. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. You have moved to the United States after living in Scotland. How does it feel living in the USA? It is very different from living in the European Union.
So right now it actually feels like both United States and Europe are sort of in the grip of some sort of collective madness. So there's politically speaking, so there's a lot of similarity in sentiment between, let's say, all the support behind Donald Trump and all the support behind the Brexit. A lot of sort of dissatisfaction with the establishment, and a lot of worry and fear and uncertainty and doubt. So right now those things are kind of similar, but of course more generally there are a lot of differences. So in terms of living here, I mean, I think of course I live in San Francisco, so it's a very, very atypical part of the United States. So this is kind of, I think San Francisco is actually where everything that is good and everything that is bad about the US is amplified. It's kind of this, like William Gibson likes to say that the future is already here. It's not just evenly distributed, and it's kind of, I think San Francisco has more than its share of the future. It's kind of the hub of technological innovation, but at the same time, it's also kind of a nexus for economic inequality and issues with housing and social problems and things like that, and sort of technological trends that have both positive and negative impact socially. Living here is extremely expensive. It's sort of to rent a flat in the center of San Francisco is now more expensive than renting a flat in central London. It's sort of the kind of concentration of technology and capital in combination with very bad housing policy has sort of made the house prices explode. But so those are kind of negative things. But I think compared to the EU, and I guess the main reason I'm here is that it's a very interesting place to be an entrepreneur, and a very interesting place for technological and scientific innovation. So I think I spent quite a lot of time here, but also a bit of time in Boston. So around MIT and Harvard and the Media Lab. So those two here and there are kind of really things where you can get a glimpse of the future. And in the Bay Area, especially in the technology sector, you have a fairly unique combination of availability of capital to make things happen, lots of talented people from all over the world, and this kind of also very very strong can-do ambitious attitude. Which sometimes also translates into overconfidence and hype and all these kinds of crazy techno-utopian schemes. So that's, but overall, I think it is a very interesting place to be right now. There's one paradox which I think is completely unique to this part of the world, is that it's sort of a collision of yuppie and hippie. So there's so the technology business here has its roots very deeply in the 1960s, 1970s counterculture movement on one hand, and on the other hand, it's extremely hardcore capitalist. So the kind of idea is that you save the world, but make piles of money at the same time. And of course, sometimes it doesn't exactly work like that. But it's an interesting contradiction, and a lot of creative things happen when contradictions arise. So I do find it very fascinating.
Mm-hmm. How does your background as a mathematician influence your work?
So I think that there's multiple aspects to that. I mean, I think the probably kind of the main thing about it is, apart from just sort of having some techno babble to play with coming from string theory, but I think the attitude that I have, especially towards writing science fiction, is that I like the idea of starting with sort of a small set of assumptions and then trying to work out the consequences. So the kind of tradition in science fiction is you are allowed the one miracle, the kind of one impossible thing, and then the kind of interesting part is treating it as a kind of thought experiment and working out all the consequences. So it's very much like that in mathematics. In mathematics, you usually start with some small set of axioms, and then from those axioms, you try to derive theorems that arise as sort of inevitable consequences. Maybe at a sort of not just the world building, but also in a way constructing stories around which are character driven. Usually sort of the ending of the story should be in some way logically inevitable, given who the characters are and the world they inhabit and how they interact. And that's kind of, so there's maybe some of that at least sometimes consciously, sometimes less consciously apply in writing, this kind of at least the pretense of mathematical rigor. And I'm kind of also very fascinated by formal approaches to story structure. So I like very much sort of frameworks like the monomyth of Joseph Campbell or a lot of the kinds of structures that Robert McGee, the author of a great screenwriting book called Story, talks about, which has sort of very formal approaches to constructing plot and character. But I do also find sometimes that it doesn't really work to be too rigid with those kinds of frameworks. Sometimes you do also need to allow the story to evolve organically and go its own way.
I like the idea of beginning your stories with some basis, like an axiom,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then letting the words flow organically. I think it's very interesting way of writing.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of course, there's sort of every book and every story also requires its own approach. Some stories do just flow organically, and some others sort of require this sort of painstaking putting together and taking them apart many times and trying to fit the pieces together in different ways. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you end up with this set of fragmented pieces that actually don't fit together, and then sometimes you end up using them somewhere else. But I mean, in fact, the Quantum Thief books are excuse me, have quite a few bits which came from other stories which I ended up not using there, but which sort of fitted in those those new settings that were in the Quantum Thief books. Yeah, I think there's some very interesting examples of authors that I admire your mathematicians. So I recently had the pleasure of meeting Rudy Rucker, who lives around here as well, and we had a conversation about that. And he what's interesting about him is that he really actually combines this sort of crazy, wild, surrealist imagination with very, very rigorous thinking. He has a great, apart from his fictional works, he has a great book called The Fourth Dimension, which I've been reading recently, related to my current novel project, Summerland, and it's sort of a beautiful, beautiful combination of sort of serious exposition about geometry and relativity and sort of the evolution of our ideas about spatial dimensions and time and fourth dimension, and then it sort of occasionally pushes those ideas very, very, very far and sort of gives you these glimpses of very strange worlds where sort of what would it be actually like to live in a causally closed loop, or what does it really mean if we take this idea of time as another dimension very seriously? Does it mean that we are actually like these four-dimensional, like centipede-like beings who actually exist all at once, and the sort of separate moments in our lives are just our perception of time. So I very much admire his ability to kind of take those rigorous ideas and combine it with the sort of really wild imagination. So which follows kind of logically from where he starts. So yeah.
Does your daytime job mix with your writing? What can you tell us about Helix nanotechnologies?
So unfortunately, I can't tell you very much about Helix nanotechnologies because we're kind of in stealth mode stage at the moment and working with a couple of companies that we have no disclosure agreements with. But so it does, of course, mix a little bit. So the sort of high level, what Helix Nano does is trying to develop new technologies based on synthetic biology to address human health. So there's been a pretty amazing revolution in our ability to both read and write DNA in the last, let's say, 20 years, sort of all the way from the Human Genome Project, but even a bit before. So now it's very cheap to sequence human genomes, and in fact genomes of any living organisms, which means that we kind of start to get a better understanding of what the code of the running living organisms is. It turns out that it's horribly complicated spaghetti code that we don't really understand very well at all, but at least we can start to read it. On the other hand, we are also getting pretty good at making synthetic DNA. So it's now possible to make synthetic genes very cheaply. So you can get a synthetic gene for just a few tens of dollars, really, and that cost is coming down very quickly. And there's now a serious project to actually eventually make a completely synthetic human genome, which I think will be possible in sort of a relatively short amount of time. So then the question is, what do we actually do with this ability? And what synthetic biology does, it sort of tries to take some parts from nature and then apply a kind of engineering approach in putting those pieces together, and also incorporating sort of biological versions of things that might be more associated with engineering, or computers, like logic circuits or oscillators and things like that. So you can kind of start building these biological devices that you can which are completely sort of based on DNA, cells and proteins, and then you can actually put them in the human body. And I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but there are some amazing examples already. So there's probably the kind of most relevant to human health are treatments called CAR-T therapies for cancer, where you actually take immune cells out of a patient's body and you put in one of these synthetic genetic constructs that reprograms those immune cells to go after types of cancer, and these are now in ongoing clinical trials in humans. This sort of 3-year-old girl was recently cured of leukemia in Britain using this approach. So this kind of ability is giving us new ways of treating disease. So Helix Nano is working on something a little bit related. We're trying to come up with better ways of delivering particular kinds of synthetic genes into the human body, combining sort of synthetic DNA and machine learning and nanotechnology. So hopefully in about 6 months to a year, I'll be able to speak more about that. But in terms of how it mixes with my day job, I think like with my previous role, which was at this company doing mathematics consultancy, just being involved with real life science and technology gives you a constant inflow of ideas that can be applied in fiction, and then sort of it's a nice playground also to try to see how far those ideas can be pushed. And then sometimes the fictional ideas feed back into the work as well. So the some of the ideas that were there around the original sort of starting point of Helix Nano came from a story I wrote for Mozilla Foundation. In a very it's a long explanation how it sort of had to do with thinking about fundamental issues around computers and computation, and how people can build very, very strange systems like these automata inside Minecraft that can actually fully implement programmable computing. So it got me thinking about doing similar things in biology. But anyway, so there's definitely back and forth flow between the two. Although sort of time-wise, I try to separate them quite clearly.
As you said, the future is here. In San Francisco, it has come earlier than to Spain, but it's coming to us right now.
Yeah, and I think it's going to spread faster as well as we kind of get better and better connected through the web and social media and other tools or video conferencing tools like this. So the ideas are only spread and be adopted faster than ever before.
It is very interesting what you said about your data job. And do you think we are prepared also to regulate that technology? For example, I don't know, if one person becomes kind of cyborg, it continues to be a person, or do we treat him like a machine or something like that? I think we are not prepared yet for that.
Yeah, so actually, it's an interesting question. I think actually, in terms of cyborgs, I think the regulatory framework may actually be better prepared, because there are a lot of examples that are sort of cyborg-like that are in use, like insulin pumps and implants and pacemakers and sort of cochlear implants and so on. So there's actually a lot of cyborgs out there already. But I agree with you that it's interesting to think about what happens to the definition of personhood as that gets taken further. But I think with this kind of treatment at genetical level, the regulatory framework is certainly not prepared, because, for example, with this kind of therapy that I described, the CAR T cells, that's a treatment you have to tailor for each and every individual patient. So there's no drug that can go through regulatory approval. There's like effectively a new drug for every single patient. And with precision medicine and being able to use the individual genome, individual genomic information of every patient, we're going more and more towards that direction. So I think organizations like FDA are trying to think about this, and I think there will be sensible guidelines going forward. But certainly in the short term, the way we do medicine just needs to be, and regulated medicine just needs a complete overhaul in the next 10 to 15 years. And yeah, it's going to be quite interesting. Another related issue, which is maybe less of an issue in Europe than here, is a lot of these treatments are, at least initially, very, very expensive. So the sort of cost burden to the healthcare system will also be greater. But then again, they may actually also finally give us some proper ammunition against certain types of cancer. So it may be worth figuring it out. But yeah, pushing it forward. I mean, what about imagine this very real possibility of a completely synthetic genome. So let's say we decide to make a human being from scratch. It's going to be possible in the next 10 years. So where you can create a we could create a completely synthetic genome with any mixture of sort of human genes we want, and synthesize them in a machine. First manipulate them inside a computer, then synthesize them in a machine, and then fertilize an egg with that genome, and then we have a human being with no parents, or human being.
A lot of parents, everyone that
not necessarily even any. Well, I mean, you could even imagine creating a synthetic genome which doesn't have it. That's sort of a completely unique combination of variants that could never have arisen through any combination of parents. So yeah, you could, or you could actually do something crazier. So I recently met a synthetic biologist called George Church, who's based at the Wyss Institute in Harvard, inventor of a lot of these technologies, and he's proposed that we could make a human being who's completely immune to all viruses by actually changing their genetic code. So viruses exploit our genetic code. They're adapted to sort of hacking our cells and getting our cells to make certain proteins that then they use to sort of initiate their replication machinery and to spread. But what if we change the genetic code of the host so that every protein in our bodies was encoded differently than it naturally is? That would mean that no virus could actually use our cellular machinery. But that would really be something completely unnatural. Like that would not have occurred in nature at all anywhere. So, and that's going to be again maybe in a sort of 10-20 year time window perfectly possible.
We have material here for a lot of stories and books. I hope you continue to write about it. For example,
absolutely. I mean, in fact, I do have plans for, after the next book. I do have plans for very much sort of a biotech related book. So and yeah, I do see sort of reality catching up with it every day. And yes, I mean there's a lot more we could talk about. I mean, there's even one just to conclude on that. Like I think the really interesting and sort of also risky and slightly scary area with our new tools for genetic engineering are things called gene drives. So kind of the tool at the core of all of this is this enzyme called CRISPR-Cas9, which has been in the media quite a lot recently. And using that system, you can not just sort of modify an individual organism, but you can actually create like this propagating gene drive that guarantees that every single offspring of the initially edited organism will have that modified gene as well. And that's also already being tested with mosquitoes. So the idea would be that you would introduce, let's say, some sort of infertility gene or a suicide gene into malaria mosquito population or Aedes aegypti, who spreads Zika. And but the danger there could be that that gene could spread to other species which you don't want it to go to, and so it does kind of ultimately lead to ability to manipulate not just individual organisms but actually entire ecosystems, and in a very short amount of time. So yeah, we do need to write science fiction about this, but also study very carefully what the implications of these new abilities and tools are.
And changing what we are talking about, even so, it's very interesting. Do you think that the authors from non-English speaking countries are more prominent right now in science fiction and fantasy than they were a few years ago?
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. There seems to be sort of, I guess the country I'm most familiar with in that respect is Finland, and just sort of in the circle of people I know, there's been sort of several people who've made breakthroughs in the English-speaking world in just the last couple of years. Emmi Itäranta, A Memory of Water. So the other more established authors like Johanna Sinisalo have already had several books published in English. Leena Kroon, and yeah, several others. Just the other day, Leena Likilahti, a Finnish author, got a major deal with Tor.com. So I think this is, even though Finland is just one specific example, I think that's a more general trend. There does seem to be more openings now for translated fiction. So I don't know necessarily why. Maybe because of the internet allowing greater visibility to publish in online markets and kind of initially explore how to get into the more traditional side of publishing. But yeah, and I think it's an amazing, very positive development. I mean, although I think actually one common trend amongst a lot of the examples I see is that quite often these are native authors who switch to writing in English.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's more translated fiction as well, but like I think some of the examples I mentioned sort of actually wrote quite a lot of, if not all, but quite a lot of their work in English, which is also a bit of a shame. I mean, there's because I think each language does have its unique tools for describing reality and its own kind of very powerful inherent viewpoints. I think you do get sort of examples as well where you have one major breakthrough or success in another genre, even in one country, and then it sort of pulls others along. So, for example, I think the Stieg Larsson books and the kind of Nordic noir genre of books then got literary agencies very much interested in Swedish authors, and as a result, there were quite a few successful sort of speculative fiction Swedish books that got sold all over the world in translation, like Sarah Hjelmgren's Circle, the Circle books. Actually, I wonder. I recently read. Now I read these in Finnish actually. I'm trying to remember the name of the Spanish author who wrote the oh god, sorry, the Angel Game and the let me Google him very quickly. But anyway, I'm wondering if that sort of phenomenon has happened in Spain.
Carlos Ruiz Zafón?
Yes, exactly. So I read that Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Yes. So I read the Shadow of the Wind and the Angel Game. I read those two recently, and he's obviously been globally an incredible success. So I wonder if, I don't know if you can comment if that has lifted up any Spanish authors also from the sci-fi fantasy field to the outside world.
I will not to be true, but it is very difficult to find translation. We have some authors like Javier Negrete, who is translated into English and into French. I think he's also translated into Italian. Miguel Aguilera, I think, is also translated. We also, with help from my friend Cristina Jurado, we edited an anthology of science fiction short stories writing by women, and now it's going to be translated into English, but it's not very common. It was kickstarted. It is called Spanish Woman of Wonder. It is our first step into English, but it is not very easy. I think there is some resistance from um, the English publishers to translate from Spanish to English. It's my opinion. I'm not sure it is like it, but I think that there is there are very few authors translated from Spanish to English.
Okay. Well, hopefully that will also change. I think the trend is certainly in the positive direction.
Mhm. Virtual reality, another question. Virtual
Sure.
reality is fundamental in your books. I've read The Great Sky Hunt you published some time ago, and I wanted to know, what do you think about the Pokemon Go phenomenon? It is the first step into the normalization of VR?
That's a great question. I mean, it's funny actually. The Great Sky Cow Hunt was actually never originally published. It was just sort of a minor short story I wrote. I think back in 2008, 2009, and I just sort of pulled it out recently because the sort of Pokemon Go phenomenon did make me think of it. So I think Pokemon Go is very interesting. I think I'm not entirely sure it's sort of necessarily the first step into the normalization of VR. I mean, it sort of represents, I think, this kind of location-based, light augmented reality type phenomenon. And one thing about Pokemon Go is that it's one of those phenomena that is an overnight success that took 20 years. So it's a combination of many things coming together at the same time. So the technology to implement these kinds of games has been around for quite a while, and there were lots of attempts to make location-based sort of alternate reality games even before smartphones. And my previous company actually did some work for the BBC in the UK on sort of trying to create a location-aware game where people could run around the city collecting treasure and solving puzzles and things like that. But none of these things ever took off until now. And so it's a question of the sort of technology becoming robust enough, but also sort of combining it with something that people can relate to, like Pokemon. And Pokemon is a massive brand that's been building for also many decades. So it's sort of, so I wonder if anything out of the blue would have sort of served the same purpose. And indeed, the Pokemon game engine, the Pokemon Go game engine, was originally developed by this small company that Google later bought as a prototype location-based game, which had nothing to do with Pokemon, which quite a few people played, but it was nowhere near this kind of massive success. So I think we are maybe seeing. So I think Pokemon Go is kind of maybe not so much harbinger of virtual reality, but this kind of location-aware augmented reality that has been in the works for quite some time. But it's absolutely true also that there's very exciting things happening with virtual reality and kind of more what you could more generally call mixed reality. So I'm sort of lightly involved with a company a friend of mine started working on a mixed reality application using currently HoloLens. So I've had the chance recently to play around with Microsoft's HoloLens, which is, if you don't know what it is, it's sort of like a visor type device you wear, and it superimposes 3D objects to your environment. So you still see the room you're in, you see the people, but you can also interact with virtual 3D objects. So that's a technologically a very impressive platform. It really, these 3D objects feel very robust. They feel very real. You can put like a little elephant on a table and walk around it and it stays there, and there's all kinds of beautiful gestural interfaces. You can open your hand like a flower to some of the main menu. There's this sort of you just kind of finger click to click on things, and all those things work surprisingly well. But I mean, there's another platform which is not out there yet, called Magic Leap, which is even more technologically impressive. That some of my friends have tried, which actually doesn't have a display. It uses something called light field technology, where through an optic fiber they actually project the 3D image right into your eye, and that apparently looks completely, utterly real. So I think we are going to quite soon have these proper mixed reality platforms that are going to be relatively affordable, and actually produce experiences which are indistinguishable from reality. So I think the difference between a game like Pokemon Go, where you're very much aware that you're still playing a game, you're running around the real world, but you feel like you're playing a game, is very different from a virtual reality or mixed reality experience where you feel like you're actually experiencing something, where the experience becomes indistinguishable from reality. And obviously we're still some ways from that, but these new platforms are going to take us in that direction. And you can see actually that phenomenon in feedback, that players who now play, let's say, shoot 'em up games or sort of Halo or whatever in virtual reality, a lot of players actually find those far too intense. So it's actually being dropped right in there is too much. You get this sensory overload and anxiety. So it may be that a lot of the successful mixed reality and virtual reality apps are things which offer you some sort of much calmer environment, something that you interact with sort of more like with you and interact with objects in real life, and which you can touch and move around with your hands without necessarily having this sensory overload, which is okay, when it's kind of in a 2D screen in front of you, but not so okay if you're suddenly dropped in the middle of it. So I think the actual we probably still have no idea what the actual killer VR mixed reality apps are going to be, and it's going to take a few years for sort of for those to really become sort of commonplace. The hardware also needs to get better. Another science fiction book that really gets it right, I think, is Bernard Vinge's Rainbow's End. I mean, that sort of gives a very good picture of where I think things are going to go. And yeah, I have Pokemon Go. I haven't really played it as much as I would have liked, but it'll be interesting to see what is the next thing after that. I mean, and it does kind of show very well that our everyday environments are now becoming this blend of digital and physical, and that's certainly going to continue.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Gamification plays an important role in Jean Leflambe's series. It is normally used in learning environments, but do you think it can be used in other environments?
Yeah, absolutely, and it already has been. I mean, there's sort of I think it was a few years ago that people really were heavily trying to explore gamification in all kinds of areas, and kinds of areas where it's been successful, I guess, is where it's sort of useful. So two things. So there's examples where you can kind of gamify pattern recognition problems where machines are not very good at. So probably the best or the most successful example is a game called Foldit, which is FOLD.IT, which is a protein folding game. So protein folding, understanding how sort of the DNA sequence gets converted into a functional protein structure in our cells, is a very, 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 very difficult problem, even for computers. But human beings actually seem to be quite good at it if you give them like this 3D game which you can play without knowing anything about biology. And so Foldit actually was able to gamify this folding problem, and the best players, who were typically like teenage kids, actually far exceeded the ability of the best algorithms to predict protein folding. And now their ideas are being fed into the next generation of algorithms. So that's one great example. Another one is something called Galaxy Zoo, which is now part of a bigger thing called Zooniverse, which also sort of uses the ability of the human brain to do visual pattern recognition. So in Galaxy Zoo, you classify galaxies from this huge data set of astronomical images, and the players have actually found all kinds of funny, previously unidentified astronomical objects and have been allowed to name them. There's a Dutch school teacher who famously named one a Warburg, which is kind of this Dutch word for a funny blob. But these are kind of, I feel these examples are still areas where it's kind of the gamification aspect is doesn't quite show its true power, because it's just a way for generating training data effectively for computers. But one really interesting thing about games is that they are very good at modifying human behavior. So when we sort of really get into a game, we kind of adopt the rule set of the game and allow it to steer our behavior towards a certain direction. And I think an area where that's going to be hugely important is health. So there's I think there's a lot of gamification of various health-related apps. I guess the sort of probably the game that started that trend was Run Zombies Run from Nike, where you sort of, it's like a jogging app where you try to escape zombies and you need to keep running faster or they catch up with you. But there's also all kinds of meditation apps. That are very game-like. There are sort of brain training apps. There's I think those kinds of aspects can be sort of incorporated into anything where you really want the player to go through this reward sort of punishment feedback cycle to modify their behavior in a positive way. So I'm not sure people are necessarily very good at doing gamification yet. There's a lot of designers perhaps are too eager to embrace it, even in problems where it's not necessarily the best solution. But yeah, I mean, I think games are now such an inherent part of our culture that the vocabulary of games is very familiar to the millennial generation in particular. So it's a great tool to use in wherever you sort of want people to be able to quickly grab something that immediately feels familiar and natural, and still has sort of a powerful effect. One interesting detail I found out recently was that all the controllers that the US military uses for drones and robots in battle environments are now modeled after PlayStation controllers, because the gaming environments are so familiar to the soldiers now. So, but yeah, I think that kind of thing will translate to health.
Mm-hmm.
Probably also for tools for doctors, actually. But yeah.
We can appreciate very different views in your science fiction, and terror. It is very different from you writing those genres, science fiction, fantasy, and terror.
No, I don't really think so. I think in both cases you are assuming one impossible thing, or sort of and I think the way I write fantasy is also trying to stay within some sort of coherent framework that doesn't feel just completely surreal. So and science fiction, depending on sort of level of hardness of your science fiction, imposes maybe more constraints and requires more research, but I think fundamentally the process is very much the same. And in fact, I think it's the same in all fiction. So it's actually, if you think about how any author writes fiction, they are imagining a world. They are imagining a world where they emphasize certain aspects and de-emphasize certain aspects, and they have some sort of internal idea about how the world works, which probably does not correspond to reality, even if it's sort of set in our world, or I mean, if you think about how the world works in Ruiz Zafón's books, I mean, it's not exactly how our world necessarily works. It has its own sort of narrative causal laws. So I think there's this kind of, every writer builds some sort of fantasy world and has to think about what the rules and ideas are that govern that world. So I don't think it's very different from science fiction.
Are social networks important in your relationship with other workers and with your readers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to. I spend quite a bit of time on Twitter. I'm sort of my issue with many online things is that I'm a very easily addicted person. So that's actually also one reason why I don't play computer games anymore. I ended up spending far too much time on them, and it's the same with social media. So I actually really seriously try to constrain how much time I use in those environments. Although I very much like using Twitter to interact with readers and other authors and participating in online conversations. When I moved to San Francisco, I actually met a lot of very interesting people through Twitter that I then met in person and hung out with. So it's great. I think there are a lot of people who use social media much better than I do in the science fiction author world. So people like Charlie Stross or Warren Ellis come to mind, but who have sort of millions and millions of followers. But given that I have so many other demands on my time that I try to keep it to the kind of level of occasional interaction with fans and other authors. I would actually like to write more Twitter fiction. So that's something I did a few years back, and I think that's actually a great format for fiction. Jeff Noon is writing really great Twitter fiction at the moment, so I recommend checking him out. But I'd like to write some more Twitter fiction as well. Although, of course, now Twitter, I think, is considering removing this 140 character constraint, so it actually make it much less interesting. But, there we are.
Summerland is going to be published in 2017. What can you tell us about your new project?
So, in summary, I guess Summerland is a spy story set in an alternate history where the afterlife is real. So it's sort of like Jean le Carré meets spiritualism kind of story. So that came out of quite a few things I read around the kind of bizarre collision between serious physicists and scientists and spiritualism in the late 19th century. And so the idea of, there was a period when the idea of afterlife existing was taken very seriously, even in scientific circles, and people like Sir Oliver Lodge, who was one of the pioneers of radio, actually was very interested in using his early radio inventions to contact his dead son in the afterlife. Edison tried to invent a spirit telephone. There was a big confluence of ideas around the fourth dimension, ether, electricity, and how sort of those could actually be the substance that spirits and the dead occupy after they've passed. And yeah, I mean, so that was sort of a train of thought I found very fascinating. That's this kind of lost dead end, no pun intended, of science and history. So I started thinking, what if we had a world where all of those ideas had turned out to be true? So in Summerland, there's a world where that looks very different from ours. It's 1938. There's a British Empire that sort of half exists in our world and half exists in the afterlife, with constant communication between the two, and the revolution that has arisen from the discovery of afterlife has kind of been sort of like the creation of the internet in our world. It's given the world literally this kind of new dimension. And there's a Cold War going on with the Soviet Union of that world and various spy games on both sides. And there's a main character who works for the British Secret Intelligence Service, who discovers that there's a mole in her organization, but that mole is actually a ghost. So she has to find a way to kind of straddle the divide between the world of the living and the dead, while sort of trying to find this spy. So that's roughly the elevator pitch for Summerland, and it's now sort of in the final stages of rewriting and editing, and yeah, so I look forward to finding out what people think about it. It's certainly very different from the Quantum Thief novels.
I can't wait to read it. You have to say it. These are the questions I have prepared. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I guess I can be found on Twitter at HANNU. So please send any further questions or thoughts there. And it's been great fun. Thank you very much, Leticia.
Thank you very much.